Hello and welcome to another episode of the Future Hospitality Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Wells, joined today by co-host Dustin Myers. We are partners at Longitude Branding, a hospitality branding and experience design agency. At Future Hospitality, our goal is to interview the brightest minds in the industry, gathering insights, ideas, and inspiration to share with you. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Ben Rafter, President and CEO of Springboard Hospitality, one of the largest boutique hotel management companies on the West Coast, with 36 hotels and resorts in 11 states. During our chat, we get to hear the interesting story about Ben's journey in hospitality and what led him to where he is now. We'll also hear about how he and his team are creating more custom-tailored local guides at their properties and the important role that technology and data plays in the guest experience. Well, let's go ahead and dive in. Ben, thank you so much for joining us today. We're super excited to have you on the podcast.
Excited to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, we're familiar with who you are, Ben, and Springboard and the awesome stuff you guys are doing, but I'd love for if our listeners aren't familiar with it, maybe share a little bit about your current role at Springboard, what Springboard's all about, and kind of your journey and career leading up to where you're at.
Sure. Springboard's 36 properties, generally independent. We're really a West Coast independent boutique hotel operator focused on both gateway markets, Los Angeles, San Francisco, good examples, and then a lot of leisure markets. We try really hard to fuse the two together. Just because you're in LA for a business trip doesn't mean you can't experience something that you'd want to experience on, say, a vacation to Hawaii. So we really view ourselves as one of the, at this point, larger West Coast independent operators.
Awesome. Yeah. So what was, your current role at Springboard? What was like the journey for yourself, over the years? How did you come to where you're at? What did that look like, your career path, and any interesting stories along the way?
Yeah, sure. I probably took one of the more interesting paths in that I was a tech guy originally. And my very first job was working in databases for Westin Hotels and Resorts back when they were in Seattle. But I probably could not have told you what RevPAR meant. I was a database guy, and they locked me into a room and had me work on frequency programs and things like that. Ended up leaving a Westin and doing a startup that we eventually sold to Amazon, and then really did technology for the next 10 years, did other startups, and at one time had a team that basically just took the core technologies of Global 2000 companies and kind of ran a DNA process with them against emerging technologies and just created new ideas. So really cutting edge technical work. Ended up selling another startup, and oddly enough got a call from this lifelong hotelier named Mike Paulin. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm on a lockout. I had a non-compete for a year. And he said, why don't you come to Everest with me, and we'll trek around and we'll go to Everest Base Camp. So I flew out to Lukla Airport in the Himalayas, 9,300 feet, met with Mike. And he asked me what I thought of the hospitality industry. And I was dumb enough to open my mouth and say, what we need to do is fuse larger than life hoteliers like yourself with kind of quant and analytic people like myself. And I think the industry would be better. And he said, okay, let's do it right on the spot. And for 15 days, we're trekking around the Himalayas. And we kind of formed the company just right there at somewhere between 9 and 19,000 feet.
So cool.
That's a really cool story. So
yeah, one side note I'll add is he said, okay, we'll do it your way with all your quant and analytic kind of mumbo jumbo. But you've got to put your cell phone number in every single room so that you remember that at the end of the day, there's a real guest in there. And so we did. And at 4 or 5 properties, that was nothing. But eventually my cell phone number was in 11,000 rooms.
Oh my.
That's such a cool story.
Yeah.
So really from there, were you taking over existing projects and applying this new way of thinking and technology, or what were some of the next steps that came out of that?
Yeah, that was November 2008, which most of you will remember was not a good time to be in as the world was crashing down. And I actually think it helped us because a lot of hotel owners started looking at it saying, we need to do this in a better way. And it really worked. We took a new approach to revenue management. We took a new approach to how we measured ancillary spend in pretty much everything and could quantify it to owners. So we started picking up hotel contracts, all in Hawaii. And eventually we had 56 hotels. 50 of them were in the state of Hawaii. We're the largest operator in the state by a long shot.
Wow.
That's cool. Yeah. As far as like where Springboard's at now, I know last year, as I understand, Outrigger Lodging, OLS relaunched and rebranded to Springboard. What are some of the, what was some of the thinking and strategy behind why you guys did that?
Well, so Outrigger or OLS has been around for 30 years. After we sold Aqua was the name of the last company that Mr. Paulin and I created. I was looking for sort of a new platform to really try to extend what we always had wanted to do. And OLS, I ended up buying OLS, and it was a great, solid platform, great people. But as we infused more of these ideas about both going above and beyond for the guests, sort of the cell phone concept in the rooms and the quant side, we just thought we wanted a name that was more reflective of who we think we are. So we renamed the company Springboard. We were building a culture around it that's a little more tech oriented, a little more forward thinking, hopefully means something a little bit more than just three initials, and definitely driven more by, tech and analytics. And that's what really led to the change. One other thing is now that we're back in Hawaii, OLS originally was Outrigger Lodging Services, and we have a great company in Hawaii that technically we compete with called Outrigger. So it was, also trying to avoid some confusion in the market, but really just want to reflect who we think we are as a culture now versus what might have been relevant 20 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. We get the question all the time, like when should a company rebrand or rename or start to change things? And I think hearing the reasoning behind that is definitely in line with how we would see that being necessary when you've kind of outgrown or when your name is no longer reflective of how you want people to perceive you, then it's time to consider changes. And it sounds like you guys made a good decision there.
Yeah, thanks. Companies grow and evolve just like anybody else. And I think if you're not thinking about those things, you're doing yourself a disservice. Our big challenge was we were debating whether to do it in the middle of the pandemic or not. And at the end of the day, we decided, let's do it. The industry needs good news, and hopefully this is perceived as good news. And so we went ahead and jumped in and did it, made the name change last year, and really focused heavily on bringing people in who could help us start sort of building our culture and our brand from ground zero as the industry sort of repairs itself too. So it should be fun. We're looking forward to seeing how it evolves in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. Yeah. The last 12 months have not been boring at all for our industry. So while everything is shifting and changing, I see that as a good time to take a new stand and get poised for growth in the future.
Yeah, exactly. And we took a different approach at our corporate or headquarters, if you want to call it. We decided to keep everybody on board and just really doubled down and said, we'll have more pain in the next 6 to 12 months, but everybody, we originally thought 6, of course, now we're at 12, headed for 18, but everybody in the company at our corporate office, gave a little bit, and we kept everybody on board and have actually expanded since then. And we're really focused on kind of executing on that now, so we're better positioned coming out.
Absolutely. I'm curious, just from the analytical and data insights that you brought to the properties that you're working with, what are some of and you don't have to give away all your secrets here if you don't want to, but what are some of the major things that you could see being improved by approaching it from that angle?
I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds, and we're not really trying to build anything. We've put together what we think is a framework of sort of here are the best in breed technologies of everything from property management systems to revenue management. One that I personally love is I think we handle content so poorly now. We don't get content in front of consumers, pre-stay, and we don't interact with consumers while they're in hotels. And we really have a lot of canned sort of content, and then everybody's folding social media that's fairly boring on top of it. I think the next 12 to 18 months, and you've talked to some people on your various podcasts who really share the same vision. We need sort of fully customized content with guidebooks for real guidebooks, fully customized guidebooks for all of our destinations. And we need to get in front of consumers way before they travel, whether it's a business travel or leisure travel, it doesn't matter. And a lot of people are sort of starting to explore that space, but that one's a personal interest.
Yeah, that's such a huge missed opportunity for a lot of properties, I think, in the hospitality space. We have these types of conversations all the time when we're talking about the brand and guest experience. And I think a lot of hoteliers might just envision the guest experience to only happen on property. And really, just like you just mentioned, like the guest experience is happening at all different phases of that journey. From the moment they start dreaming about visiting a property or planning, to the booking process, to the time between booking and their visit, and during the visit, obviously, and then after the visit. There's all these different stages of the guest journey, and I think, like you said, being able to impact some of these different stages of the guest journeys would be such a huge value. And I think you're right that technology can play a huge role in that.
Yeah, and people want to get out and about. We have a property called Renew in Hawaii, and obviously people come to Hawaii for dozens of reasons. Some people just want to sit on a beach or go to a few restaurants, but a lot of other people want to understand what Hawaii is. And this property, Renew, it really had no common space. It was a small 72-room property, great location right off of Waikiki Beach. And we flipped the whole concept around. We said, let's get these people out of the hotel, and specifically try to get the people out of the hotel and start experiencing things that are unique to Hawaii. And so we called it external wellness, for lack of a better word, but with no spa or fitness center or anything. We decided that the island was sort of our fitness center, and we hired a wellness concierge and partnered with lots of organizations, and everything from, if you want to harvest cacao, we know how and where to do that. If you want to repair a Hawaiian fish pond, we were offering that, down the list with experiences. And just the idea was, learn something about Hawaii that you're interested in. A lot of those things you can't do anywhere else in the United States, or some cases North America. And let's make that sort of the public space of the hotel. And then let's get it in front of the people in a way that lets them, explore and figure out what they want to do.
Yeah, that's I think the sustainable and that this idea of transformational travel is really growing. And I think what you just described is a perfect example of that. People traveling for a purpose, to engage in their surroundings, engage with themselves, or explore something new, get a greater connection to themselves or to nature, to the culture around them. And so I think that's really cool to hear how you guys are approaching that from a wellness and programming standpoint as well. That's really neat.
Yeah, and it's all about micro targeting. This hotel had 72 rooms. A lot of our hotels are 150, 200 rooms. I mean, there are places and a lot of people who just want the comfort of knowing, it's the hotel equivalent of going to the Cheesecake Factory or something, right? And the Cheesecake Factory in Hawaii is enormously successful, but we're trying to target 72 rooms, and we want the opposite of that. We want people who, one, as you say, is they're going to leave Hawaii a better place than they got here, and two, they really want to experience what is the culture? Why am I here? Other than it's 78 degrees today instead of 28. But and we obviously with the pandemic we've had to scale things back, but just the amount of interest in people who wanted to repair fish ponds and things was enormous. And that's not easy work, but they leave it feeling like, wow, I did something, and I saw how some other culture worked back several hundred years ago.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think a lot of, in times past, there's been a mindset of where do I want to go and do, and then where am I going to stay while I'm going and doing. But I love how you're kind of transforming the stay experience into the doing and the seeing and the experiencing. And opting for, instead of a stale workout room in the basement, getting people out and truly experiencing the area, creating lifelong memories, really, and baking that into the entire hospitality experience.
Yeah, exactly. And we view it, back in the day, you would go to your hotel room, and again, there's a book that was printed by a bunch of advertisers that would show you where the nearest Louis Vuitton is, and it was all static content, and none of it was customized. And we're learning on the fly how to serve up this content to people, but the industry needs to go to almost the opposite of that book, which is the content is real, it's custom to that hotel, which the guest has picked for a reason. And most importantly, we can get it in front of the guest in a way that lets them get interested. And 9 out of 10 guests are not interested in restoring a Hawaiian fish pond. But if you serve up 30 or 40 truly unique experiences, they're going to say, oh yeah, this one's for me. And it's just wonderful when they get back to the hotel and are sharing these memories that we've helped be a part of. And again, it's not for everybody, but we're only targeting, in most cases, a couple hundred rooms here.
From a technology standpoint, how are you guys better customizing the experience for the guest? Do you guys have an app, or you mentioned social media, but how are you delivering that at an individualized level?
So we call it the guest journey. And what we're trying to do is, as soon as that guest books with us, and some guests don't want to communicate. They do just want to show up at the hotel and they'll figure it out when they get here. But as soon as that guest books, and a lot of these leisure markets even now have a fairly long lead time, we start trying to interact a little bit with them. What are you interested in? Why are you here? We're trying to effectively profile Facebook or Amazon or somebody like that is driving it. And ultimately, when they get here, hopefully via either technology or via a live person, we know enough to say, hey, you might want to do this. Or this may be it's not all about going to cacao farms and things like that. This may be a restaurant that you're interested in. And basically, it's a constant feedback loop with the guests that continues after they leave, right? And we've learned and added new experiences based on guests coming to us and saying, hey, I wish you would have thought about this, right? The challenging part is everybody's sensitive to content and information right now. So we're trying to do it in a way where the guest is really providing that information, and we're taking what we know about a market and then serving that back to them. And it'll start, 5, 7, 9 weeks before their stay. And then of course they'll go all the way through the stay and afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned before, I think I either in our previous conversation or I might have read it on your website somewhere, but I think the term, you're trying to create properties, Springboard's trying to create properties that mean something to somebody. And I think, some of the things you've already described kind of show how you're approaching that. But do you have any other, kind of unique or cool examples or case studies of how you've approached this at a property level as well?
Yeah, it all goes back to, it's kind of funny how things in my life go back to a trip to Nepal, but a lot of it goes back to what this gentleman, Mike Paulin, told me in terms of, you can't ever forget that at the end of the day, you have a real live person, and in some cases who's saved for their entire lives to come to a place like Hawaii or Sedona or New York or wherever. And getting a little bit off topic here, so we're always going to try to customize that experience. And one thing we're doing with, say, take social media is we got rid of both the idea of, let's just do a handful of social media posts at a property and we'll get an influencer there and we'll have a nice whiteboard behind it with our logo and stuff like that. We also got rid of the idea of using an agency. And take West Hollywood, where we have 4 properties, we hired a person to basically go create our own neighborhood guide. And her job, and if I were 23, I think it'd be a great job, is learn the property, learn the neighborhood, write unique content about the neighborhood, make sure it is fully customized so that we can take it. And when we know somebody is interested in X and not Y, we can customize that. And again, do the opposite of that book that sits in your room that was printed a year ago and is full of advertisements. So, and then that, of course, leads to better social, it leads to better content, it leads to better websites, it leads to better guest interaction and everything. We're also trying to make it a little more adventurous. When I first came to Hawaii, I remember one day I wanted to go on a hike, and as you can guess, given the theme so far, I love hiking. And I went to the concierge of the particular hotel that I was staying at, and I said, I want to go on a hike, and I really love hiking, so make it something rigorous. And she handed me this photocopied sheet of a paved trail to a waterfall. And I said, that's not really what I'm looking for. And she says, well, it's the only hike that we can recommend. And so, of course, I did what all of us would do. Probably I went out to the valets, and one of the valets says, this is a great hike. You'll love it. And came back 4 hours later, with a cut on my leg, and I'm all muddy and soaking wet because it was raining in the mountains. And the guy looks at me and was that a great hike? And I said, yeah, that was the best hike I could have experienced. And we're trying to offer that experience. So when you go to Sedona, we're not going to give you, here's random trail XYZ. And when you come to Hawaii and you ask about food, we're not going to send you to unless you want to go to the Cheesecake Factory, we're probably not going to send you to the Cheesecake Factory. We're going to say Chinatown has this great hole-in-the-wall dumpling shop. And sort of what, in my mind, holds it all together is, again, customizing these neighborhood guides ourselves and then not being afraid to serve them up to the customer. We're all terrified now of being sued because you gave a hiking trail that is a ski equivalent of a black diamond or even a blue square one, and the guy sprained his ankle. In my experience, with 20 million guests at this point, probably we've been sued 0 times for recommending that black diamond hiking trail.
Yeah. That's what you just described. I mean, I had a similar experience, with one of our clients actually. And before we started working with them, I visited the property and did kind of a little bit of a secret shopper type of approach to just staying at the property, interacting with it, and asking the front desk again. I asked for a recommendation on like a nice local restaurant, and she kind of looked at me with a blank stare, and she actually recommended, right, I think it was Applebee's to me. Because they were just right down the road, and I was like, well, it's not really like a local, So I think there's tons of value in like spending the extra little effort to do some digging into like the local culture, the local scene, like opportunities depending on the type of person that might, creating personas around the people that might be visiting your property, and define these types of personas, figure out content or things and content that they would like to, or they'd be interested in, or adventures they'd be interested in. And I love that you guys are doing that and like merging that with your operations, your guest experience, the technology that you're integrating. And that's really cool to hear how you guys are on kind of the cutting edge of that right now.
Yeah, and there's a lot of learning on the way. But first off, I agree completely. The Applebee's example is a classic one, because food and beverage is often where you see it. It's like you're going to recommend the place down the street or the hotel's restaurant. But we've done a lot of experimenting along the way. What we wanted to do first is, I would go to a lot of these properties and we'd get the whole team together. I'm like, who's the foodie here, and who's the hiker here, and who's the best surfer here? And we thought we'd have sort of an experienced team, and that I think it was a good idea, but it really didn't work. And we were going to give GoPros to people and then give them the content from the GoPros, as long as we had a right to use it too and incorporate it into the websites. And again, a little bit too much. And so we scaled back and said, let's first focus on building the content ourselves, but with somebody. It gets back to the person I described for West Hollywood, with somebody whose job it is to say, I'm going to go out and find the things in the neighborhood, in the culture, on the island or in the city that we think our guests are going to want to do. And we'll expand it from there once we get our arms around it.
Yeah, I love that grassroots, just kind of boots on the ground, figuring it out and making it authentic, and it not coming from an office 1,000 miles away, just trying to figure out something. But I love that approach. I think that's a really good way to get authentic results.
Yeah, I always laugh and say you can't create a brand or a hotel experience from the fifth floor of an office building. You've got to be out there doing it. The personal opinion, and again, the great thing about the hotel industry is there are so many different types of guests. There are millions of guests who want to go to a hotel where that hotel is the same every single time, and great for them. Again, we're able to target the guest that wants the opposite of that. And the wonderful thing is there's an audience for both.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's on the horizon for Springboard? Do you guys have any renovations or changes or new properties coming up?
Yeah, we've added almost 2,000 rooms during the pandemic, which
Wow.
Not a lot for a major brand, but that's a lot for us. And great markets like Jackson Hole and Park City, Hawaii, 3 Hawaii islands. And so, again, we think those markets are great for what we're trying to do. We have 6 new builds that we're working on with various partners. For everything from the first new full service property in Anchorage in many, many years to a property in Los Angeles that's well located for where some of the neighborhoods in Los Angeles are moving. So, going back to my tech roots again, it's sort of, we're just absolutely not going to take our foot off the gas. And that's the only thing we know. And the people who've joined the company have embraced that, and they kind of love it. And in my mind, it's just, if you're not going to be going full speed all the time, you're just sort of wasting your time. And so we're implementing new ideas. We're figuring out new technologies. We're constantly sort of adding to that framework of best in breed, or removing some of them, frankly, that are stopping their investments because of the pandemic. And finding new ways to interact with guests. I'd like to be, in the long term, I'd like the company, first off, to be sized well enough that we don't lose sight of all these things we've talked about here. I don't think we ever get to 500 properties because we just wouldn't be able to do what we do. But I also would like to get to the point where when people are thinking about great independent operators, and particularly great independent operators on the West Coast or in these gateway markets or leisure markets, they're thinking about us.
Well, I would definitely say that you're on the right path there. And it's been really cool to, get to know you and, learn more about Springboard and all the exciting things that you guys are doing. And, as we kind of end here, I'd like to just know, looking into the future, we always like to ask our guests, what's on the horizon for you and your team, or just, what are you excited about for the future of the industry, the hospitality, travel, tourism industry? And so do you have any, either whether it's personal, professional, or anything, is there anything that you're kind of gets you up and gets you excited in the morning every day looking ahead?
Well, we're it's kind of cliche, but we're trying to have fun. That's the most important thing. You can't change the fact that we have things like the pandemic that we're dealing with. And I also love the uncertainty of, where we're going next. A lot of people talk and say, what's the strategy? And say, the strategy broadly is X, but we'll move within that. And there's enormous uncertainty right now, which is, I view as opportunity. But beyond the guest life cycle and the customization, I would say we in hotels have so much data that we can learn from and use. And I really want to push that data, not only to help a hotel make more money and give back more to the community in a way that's good for the guests, but to keep pushing hard on that customized experience. And you take Hawaii again, you have 10 million visitors in Hawaii prior to the pandemic. And why would you want to look at hotels and a guide and content that's the same for everyone? And we're going to take those 10 million visitors and distill it to one. And to me, that all rolls around content and data, and that's what I'm excited about. I'm not going to be the guy who says, we need to get our per occupied room costs down from, down by 2 cents, and we need to do that. But that's somebody else's role.
Right. Cool. Well, I've really enjoyed the conversation, Ben, and it's been really inspiring. How can people, get a hold of you guys at Springboard or find out more?
Well, obviously, springboardhospitality.com. And as we've learned, I'm more than happy to give my cell phone number out to everybody.
Go ahead.
So, 808-349-0670. Give me a call. Great thing is, the way to learn something is to learn from other people because they're out there experiencing it, right? You can only do so much yourself. So I really love the potential for the industry coming out of this as we work through this obviously challenging times.
Yep. Awesome. Well, Ben, thank you so much for joining us. It was a great conversation. And until we chat again, have a good one.
Great. Thank you. Wonderful.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Future Hospitality Podcast. If you enjoyed today's topic and episode, please leave us a review. You can also find us on Instagram at Future Hospitality and on Facebook by searching for Future Hospitality.